And good morning. It's time for the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com. And now your host, Mike Hewitt.
Hey, good morning. Listen, we've got a packed show today. I've got Jim Riley flying shotgun.
I'm here, baby.
And we've got our resident adjunct professor sitting in with us, Matt Wiedenhoff. Welcome to you both. And we've also got Brian Thomas, who kind of keeps us on track. It reminds me a little bit about the bumpers at the bowling alley. So he keeps us on track, and from time to time lets me know verbally that we're way off in the weeds. Listen, on the line with us, we've also got Alan. Is it Schusterman?
That works.
Welcome back to the show, Alan.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm really glad to be here.
Listen, folks, for those that may have missed it, Alan was on with us, what was it, 3 or 4 weeks ago?
Yep.
And you're an educator. You're the founder of the School for Tomorrow. And tell us, before we get real deep into the woods here, what is School for Tomorrow? What's it mean, Alan?
So School for Tomorrow's goal is to create the type of school that actually serves kids well in the 21st century. And I say that because, unfortunately, right now, all the schools, even the best public, private, and charter schools, are using a model and using methods and teaching things that are, quite frankly, obsolete or at best out of date and can be greatly improved. So the way we describe it is we're trying to create the school of the future, which all the experts are talking about will happen in 20 or 30 years. We're trying to create it now, and in fact, we will create it within the next couple of years. We're in the process. We're in a work in progress, and already the results that you're seeing from our students have been fabulous.
Very, very nice. Listen, folks, before I forget, I want to make a mention that in the next segment, Dick Mansouri will be with us, and we're going to be talking with him about a whole bunch of refugees that he says are being snuck in to Michigan and other states. And then in the final segment today, the Enigma Report, just a brief hint. The Enigma Report is going to talk about some hidden taxes that probably you and I have both at sometimes made fun of, not realizing exactly what we were saying. So we'll have some fun with that. But Alan, listen, one of the reasons I wanted to have you back, for me, I maintain that one of the large disconnects is the declining relationship that should be a partnership between parents and teachers. What do you think on that topic?
I think in general, because the education industry as a whole has basically changed so little and performed so poorly in the last 20, 30, or 40 years, there are certain characteristics that have developed industry-wide that don't serve kids well and that kind of protect the status quo. And I believe one of those is the relationship in general between educators and parents. So, yes.
You're probably on the right path, but I would maintain that it goes back a lot further than that. And in fact, we've talked about on this show before when we've gotten into education, is I think as America drove itself into the industrial age back before the turn of the 20th century, our teachers back then were teaching some really, really difficult topics, and they were doing it more as a mission than as a career or in search of greater incomes, etc. They were doing it from essentially one-room shacks. Critical thinking was paramount, so that you could get down the road and assemble facts and come up with an image and be able to construct something. Whereas nowadays, I think we teach memorization. I think a lot of that is because we're stuck on the path of how in the heck do we pay for this $50 million building and these outrageous incomes packed with benefits and part-time jobs, rather than how do we educate people. And to me, I think that's fundamental, the mission that we should be focusing on. But with that, one of the returns that we're getting is it's like in economics, is the law of diminishing return. With each generation is less equipped to be parental partners with educators than the generation before it. And so we've talked about on this show many times that, myself included, most of us could not pass a reading, writing, or arithmetic test from 8th grade 1895. I see that's all over the internet, but it's a reality. We just can't. And to me, that's deplorable while we walk around in these new big gigantic buildings and go, isn't this beautiful? But our kids are being raised to be buffoons.
So I wish I had a transcript of that in front of me so I can address each point, because each point resonates strongly with me. Yeah, I mean, if you go back and look at what is really driving the education world now, and I'm focused on K through 12 education right now, and really, if you analyze things that are happening, they're all happening because it's in the interests of the adults maintaining the status quo as opposed to what's good for kids, period. And I think you're probably right. You know, 20, 30, 40 years ago, you had a different profession, a different ethic that are trying to actually good for kids more so. There's no doubt among the things that have happened in the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years is that the profession itself has become much more lucrative.
It has, but let me tell you how I'm viewing this. And listen, Matt Wiedenhoff is with us. He's an educator. I purposely wanted him to sit in with us today, just because I think he's got a different vantage than you. But listen, I'm one of those guys where in business I believe that if I set a goal, I have a chance of getting that goal, and I make that equate to how we educate. I don't think our goal is education anymore. We set a goal on funding, and we've got a pretty good shot at achieving the funding, but the goal isn't education anymore. Back at the turn of the century, I commented that as we drove into the industrial age, the goal then was how do we create a society filled with lever pullers and button pushers, and that's what we've gotten. We've gotten folks that, and listen, I don't want to paint with a big gigantic CNN brush here, so I want to hedge myself a little bit. There are some young people that I've had on this show that are absolutely brilliant and can certainly outpace me, aside from Matt Wiedenhoff. And I say that because he's much younger and he's over there pointing at himself. Listen, I don't think everyone falls into this category, but the educational goal has dramatically shifted, like I'd mentioned, from education to funding. And I know I've got some MEA and some NEA people, if they're listening, they're yelling at the radio right now because they think I'm wrong. I'm not. Just do the math, folks.
Well, let me address first on the fact that they're still fantastic, fabulous, amazing young people that you meet. That just goes to show, again, the potential of every young person in this country. And it's not because of school that those people became fabulous, because generally outside of school, their family, some other thing that happened, or if they're lucky enough to bump into one of those teachers that still exist that are life-changing, inspirational. So the potential's in every kid. So, yeah, of course not that all our kids are being, in a sense, destroyed. But it's, again, despite school, not because of school. And if you talk about what the emphasis is, exactly, the whole education establishment will talk a good game. But you're exactly right. There are two things that basically they produce in kids, is the ability to memorize, or at least they try to create the ability to memorize, and the ability to follow directions, which are two skills that 100 years ago for certain types of jobs were very important. And today is not going to give kids the jobs they need or prepare them for college.
When we talk about those children that excel, even in spite of what's going on in the educational industry, and I'm so glad you used that word, but those folks, those young people that are excelling, overwhelmingly come from traditional families that are intact, meaning there are still educational partners in the home that are saying, listen, dinner's done, it's time for you to do your homework and bring it to me so that I can see it, and let's work through these questions together. Those are the same parents, by the way, that teach critical thinking, and in part of that it goes, not teach, parents that are teaching critical thinking. Those are the parents that are saying, listen, are we watching the news together? Let's talk about what's happening in the world today so that the child can walk away and know how his or her parents are interpreting it, rather than how somebody on Twitter or Facebook or CNN are interpreting it.
Yeah, well, that generally is true. The reality is that there are fewer and fewer parent or parents who either do that or are in a position to do that. We now have even, let's say, highly educated parents who value education who are too busy with their own lives to focus it on their kids.
Listen, let me inset, though. I've talked to a lot of highly educated folks that are dumber than corks.
Thank you.
And I'm not trying to be disparaging to you or anybody else, Alan. What I'm saying is that it's kind of like the person that worked at General Motors and they put the back left tail light on for 30 years and think they're a car builder. When we go to school for all of those years and we're taught absolutely nothing but memorization for Friday's test, that doesn't end up with a groundswell of geniuses at the end of it. Doesn't matter to me how long they attended if they're learning indoctrination rather than facts and figures and how to read and write. A lot of these folks that are running around with master's degrees cannot construct a basic sentence.
You're 100% correct, and that's what I always say is, as someone who, through my education path, got to share space with the most highly educated people at the University of Pennsylvania, at Harvard Law School, I could tell you firsthand that what you just said is exactly correct. I find
it fearsome, and so as grassroots people, when we're saying, what the heck is going on with our leadership? How come somebody like Donald Trump? Nothing against Donald Trump, but how can somebody like Donald Trump take the lead with all of these educated people? And the reason is that those folks have all went through the same process that we're lamenting over today. And that's why leaders are ill-equipped to be leaders, is they don't have foundational critical thinking and foundational knowledge to work from. I believe that.
And I agree. And on that front, to the extent that it'd be fun if you got someone on here who could debate the other side, because that's what I'm waiting for. Because there's no way to the education establishment, the teachers' unions, everybody else will say in all their literature and brochures, they'll say, number one, what we're doing is we're teaching 21st century critical thinking skills, blah, 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 blah. And yet, every year, tens of thousands of kids show up to the most highly selective schools, forget the less selective schools. The best and brightest of our students show up as freshmen to college, and over, if you ask the professors who teach those kids, and even the Ivy League schools, they will complain about two things. Number one, most of these kids can't write worth a damn. And number two, as a professor told me one day, the best, I like this, he said, they can't think their way out of a paper bag. And what he's really saying is critical thinking, logical thinking, any kind of creative thinking, they haven't had the experience or the exposure in school to do it. Yet the schools claim they're doing it.
Part of it is, Alan, listen, I'm the layman in the room here, but part of it appears to me to be we do cookie-cutter education without any form of variance whatsoever. So we have these monstrous schools that we build on purpose that we can't afford, and then we fill them with too many kids. And I would much rather see us have much more local, way smaller schools. And by the way, it's more fiscally sound, but don't tell nobody, because then that wouldn't be able to have school boards be really important for leading these big, gigantic facilities. But to me, if it's the same thing I've been saying all along. If somebody in 1896 that graduated 8th grade is smarter than a master's degree, we've got a real crisis. We really do. And it's an enigma. I won't get to it in my enigma section today, but to me it's an enigma why our entire culture isn't up in arms over it. And I mean that literally.
And I agree. And if one of my major goals in life is to spread the word and get people should be, to me, this is the most important issue, certainly for the future of our kids as individuals, but also for this country. And yet we get lip service to it at best because we're busy fighting about things that are irrelevant in education.
We really are. And if by the way, if we had the contrary voice, I ran for office in 2006 and I lost. By the way, there were 8 candidates in a primary, but often when you have that many candidates in a primary, there's some undercurrent battles that folks don't see. And in this particular race that I was in, I was endorsed by the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, and one of the other candidates was endorsed by the Michigan Education Association. So you had this 2-level battle going on, the one on the street where I think it should be with the constituents, and the one from Lansing with direct mail campaigns and all of that. But one of the byproducts that I had out of that race is I had some teachers, I don't want to say accost me, but try to heckle me during events. And I had, and still do, a reading, writing, and arithmetic book from 1896. So whenever I started getting heckled, I'd hold up the book, say, listen, if you can pass any of the tests in this arithmetic book, I'll change my political stance on education. Promise. No, but they always wanted to talk about funding. It's always more money. It doesn't matter what the problem is. The other side, it's easy for me to play the devil's advocate with you, Adam or Alan, because the other side, all their answer is we need more money. More money, more money. They've got more money than any other country on earth per pupil, and their answer is they need more money. But what are we, 18th or 19th on the list right now of the world free world or Western world society's list of education, even though we're the most funded, and still the answer is more money. That's a crisis to me.
Yeah, well, basically we have this approach and model of education, and we keep beating the dead horse with more money, and from the student's point of view, it's more time. So what we've seen is a huge increase in the quantity of homework, which, by the way, that when you talk about families, even families who are trying to work with their kids and teach their kids, the homework these days, the nature of it is more of an impediment than anything else, because oftentimes the homework is inane, the homework is hard to follow, and it just takes up time and energy of kids that otherwise could be spent doing something productive, doing some real learning outside of school.
Alan, I had 4 daughters I put through school, and I'm smiling when you're talking about that. I remember having a dialogue with an assistant principal. His first question was, "Do you have any more daughters?" Because he was sick of seeing me. They really don't want an engaged parent, okay? That was the first thing that I got kind of kick out of. I'll never forget that. But the other thing he set me straight on in that meeting, he said, "Mike, you don't understand. This isn't the real world here." I was aghast by that. That's exactly what we're trying to prepare our youth for, is the real world. And he was very stone-faced, matter of fact, that I didn't understand. Oh, no. He doesn't understand that his very job is to prepare our youth with the partnership with parents to arrive at a successful society going forward. That's the whole purpose of it. It reminded me of the image of the wild chimpanzees, with the old one showing the young chimpanzees how to wash off food by throwing it in the water because it floats. They scoop it up, and now we show the next generation how to live. And that's what we're supposed to be seeing our schools for.
Right. I mean, schools, a major problem is a complete disconnect between schools and the real world, which, of course, again, is bizarre because you'd think, if anything, they'd be more integrated with the real world than any other industry. But basically, schools both are preparing kids for a world that doesn't exist anymore, and they're doing so without taking advantage of all kinds of resources and knowledge that exist in the real world. On the parent front, let me just jump into that, too, because this is one of my pet peeves. One of the strategies of the education world approaches is that we have some sort of expertise that parents just don't understand.
We don't. Listen, Alan.
If I have just 30 seconds,
okay.
Because I always to say this to every parent, at least, if you don't understand what's happening with your kid in school and it doesn't make sense to you, that's because it doesn't make sense, not because there's some sort of mystery in the education world that we know as educators that this is what's good for your kids. Education is not a complex industry like brain surgery where I can't really understand what the brain surgeon is saying, or car mechanics for me when I can't understand what they're saying. Every human being should at least be able to understand what is going on with their kid in school, and it should make sense.
It should be common sense. Alan, we've got to end it there, but listen, first off, how do people get a hold of you and your school?
Okay, you can find the school at sftedu.org. That's our website. And I'm very happy to hear from anybody at my email address, which is aschusterman, which is ASHUSTERMAN, at sftedu.org.
Very nice. Alan, thank you very much for joining us again.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, Mike.
Folks, we'll be right back.
This is News Talk 1090 WKBZ.
And now back to the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com and your host, Mike Hewitt.
Does anyone recognize the music is back from early on in the show? Nobody recognized it.
No, I did.
Did you?
I recognized it. I just didn't want to make a nasty comment on air.
How unusual of you. That's all right. We just had him turn the switch off again. Listen, folks, on the line with us is Dick Manasuri. Am I saying it right?
You got it.
Okay, good. I've been practicing, Dick. Listen, welcome to the Mike Hewitt Show, sir.
Well, I'm happy to be on the show with you, Mike.
Yeah, listen, folks, what Dick and I and company are all going to discuss here for a little bit is he tells me, in fact, we learned last week from Jim Simpson, and this is kind of almost a follow-up interview to that, if I might, but there are folks refugees from 27 countries that are being placed into 40 Michigan cities secretly right now. I'm reading your words. Is that true, Dick?
That's true, and that's accurate through June of this year, starting from October of last year. So it's really on the move. It's been happening in July and August as we speak. It's happening every day.
Listen, here's what I asked Jim Simpson last week. So I'll ask you the same thing, because you and I think all of us today will probably drive a little bit deeper into some specifics than we were able to get last week. But for folks listening, what's wrong with America taking in some refugees from other countries in troubled times?
Well, as an individual person, a human being, an American, maybe perhaps a member of a faith, perhaps a Catholic, that's a wonderful thing to do on an individual level. The problem is, I think in the early segment you were talking about the education industry. When people make money and create an agenda and are an industry on an international level to move people into your country, and you're a sovereign country that has a representative government and you have no say in who's entering your country, who's entering your county, who's living down the street, that's the problem. It's not that we don't care about other people. It's that we're being manipulated.
Listen, tell me this. I get it a little bit that there's a second body that I don't know if it operates in conjunction or concert with the United Nations, but I know it's a global entity that moves people from one place to another. And in this case, they're the conductors of the orchestra bringing us in these refugees. But we are a sovereign union of states, and so it would seem to me that President Obama or whomever sat in that office or Congress in total could draw a line in the sand, hating to be cliche, and say enough, no more, or we want those folks and not those folks, or we're going to define people from political strife, yes, people that just want to come here, What are you saying we have, that we are as a sovereign state are absent of control? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think what we'll find is that we're absent of representation. If we have elections, but we don't end up with representation, that's the problem. So, for example, the president does have control. In fact, that's the problem. The problem is that the president is in favor of changing America by changing its people. He has a task force purposely dedicated to that. The Congress is made up of people from both parties. However, they both turn their head the other way and don't look at the number that the president presents. So, for example, at the end of September this year, the president will slip a piece of paper over to Congress, and they will look the other way. That piece of paper has a number on it. Last year, that number was probably 70,000, and that says, go get them. This year, the number is, we're concerned that number is going to be significantly higher because of the rumors about moving Syrians into America in great numbers. So the point is, we have ways, the law says this process happens from the UN to the State Department to 9 agencies. We can talk about the 350 subcontractors. Think of this like UPS on a worldwide basis. They're moving packages. They have hubs. They have distribution. They have ground transportation to put somebody down on your street. The difference is that this is all happening from the UN to the State Department to these agencies without your knowledge.
Basically, our government, including Obama, have provided them a rubber stamp approval. That's what I get out of this.
Including the Congress. I think we need to include the Congress.
Including Congress. Our government in total, yes.
And we even have some governors who actually are very much in favor of this. So there's definitely an industry here. So I think that's an important word. There's an industry, just like you talked about the teachers union, we have lobbyists. There's enough money being made, and we'll start to name the names now. In the state of Michigan, the 2 agencies that work with the State Department and move most of the refugees into Michigan are the Lutheran Refugee Services and Catholic Charities. Let's just call them the Catholic and the Lutheran agencies. They move people into Michigan, but they and the other 7 large contractors make enough money from this industry that they can pay lobbyists to go to Washington and lobby for more and more refugees, just like UPS would go out and try to get a more package load to make more money. So, for example, the 9 organizations, including the Catholic bishops and the Lutheran Church, are lobbying for 65,000 Syrians to come into the United States through this process to your neighborhood between now and the end of the Obama term. So it's clearly an industry, and I think we need to acknowledge that. And there are other people cheering on the sidelines. People who want cheap labor are very much in favor of this and promote it any way they can.
Listen,
so,
here's the problem I have with this stuff, Dick. And first off, just so you know, I'm on your side with concern. But listen, let's be earnest about it. If we were to put this topic on the ballot, I think you'd find that the people, the folks, would overwhelmingly approve it based on the idea of helping other people.
Not if they knew the cost.
But I don't know. But we're not dealing with if you look at a nation that's got 325 million people and we're dealing with 70,000, listen, I am alarmed. I'm on Dick's side on this, but I've also been involved in a lot of elections, and I see how people see these things, and they're thinking, jeepers, if 70,000 divided amongst 50 states, divided amongst a dozen cities within Michigan, it's really not affecting my world, and we can help those people. We can afford it.
Well, Mike, I think what you just did was a great service because you established the problem, the message. Let's talk about it and pick it apart if we can, Mike, at the local level.
That was my point, yep.
Thank you. No, that's excellent. It's very important to recognize people are busy, their lives are going on. They don't necessarily identify with this problem necessarily. I will share with you that there are small pockets of people in every state, including the group that I'm with, and we're out talking to people with presentations. And those detailed presentations, if we can get to them, we can tell you that because of a researcher that we have in Michigan who digs into the federal database, we know the detail that there were 22 different countries in 2014 and 27 different countries people coming into Michigan. The numbers are 4,000 in 2014. The cities where they get distributed include Grand Rapids and Ann Arbor and Troy. And specifically, we can identify, for example, in the city of Grand Rapids, in the last 9 months alone, 465 people were moved into neighborhoods. They now have mailing addresses in Grand Rapids, and we know the countries that they come from. Well, many of the countries, by the way, just to give you put that in perspective, in the Troy area, 1,215 refugees are coming into Troy this year. So far, 378 have been placed with mailing addresses, including my town. All right, so fine. I mean, I realize that that's just statistics. We have the statistics. More important than the statistics is a good number. We know that half of the people that are coming into the United States, at least in the last year, are coming from countries that are involved in turmoil, or countries that have a high representation of people who basically have a different perspective on a lot of the cultural things we deal with. So, for example, the rate of Christian refugees being accepted is going down, and the rate of Muslim refugees is going up significantly. If you look at the idea that the industry wants 65,000, I'll just call them packages, to come in and be distributed in the next 15 months from Syria. Let's think about Syria. It's a state that's at war. It's a failed state. We cannot vet any of those people according to the FBI and some congressional testimony. So we have a risk. 94% of all Syrians who've been brought into America are, in fact, Muslim.
Listen, one of the words, I got to stop you for a second, Dick. One of the words that I think is key to this debate, and let me show both sides of the proverbial teeter-totter for a minute. On one side, I think that America's built on immigration, and that helping people who are in political plight is a conscious, that's something that our conscience demands that we do. That's the one side of the teeter-totter. The other side of the teeter-totter is your word, vetting. I think that America was also built largely on vetting, and people will say, Mike, that's not true. Well, it is true. We can point to Ellis Island. I can show you pictures after picture after picture, including my own family that came over in 1881. I show you all the documents and everything that was created from them coming, the health processes that they had to go through. They didn't just say, here's your welfare check and here's your free house and here's your insurance card. They went through a process, and then they had to earn their way. And we seem to have lost touch with that as we embrace political correctness. I think vetting is crucial.
I think that's a great comment, and I think one observation is my grandparents, thank God, came in the rush of the refugees. But if you notice, historically, we took a break. After we brought a lot of people through in the early 1900s, we took a break. We stopped the process to evaluate it and decide what was good for America from that time forward. The other point is that I think my grandfather, God bless him, came here yearning to be free. We have people here yearning to be fed. So one of the differences is we are absolutely positively promising every one of the refugees, whether 70,000 or 130,000, immediately upon landing in America, they are immediately connected to every welfare system we can provide them with. We're spending $7 billion a year to move them and hook them up to federal benefits. In the state of Michigan, after the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church removes their support, these people are basically wards of the state of Michigan. They're getting Medicaid support. They're getting cash. And so after 5 years in America, Jim Simpson's work and others show, after 5 years of refugees in America, 74% are still on food stamps. 54% are still on Medicaid. So Michigan taxpayers all over the world, it's not a charity, the taxpayers are supporting people in Grand Rapids and Troy and other places in Michigan with ongoing welfare services. And keep in mind that it's a true statement. Even though these people are coming from countries that are in difficulty, some of these people are coming to America with funds that they can support themselves. They're not given a chance to support themselves. They're not invited to assimilate. They are immediately put on welfare.
Dick, over the last 10 years, I bet I've read at least a dozen newspaper articles where communities were for lack of better words, were bragging over being the host cities or host communities for the folks you're talking about.
Absolutely. That's absolutely happening right now in Sterling Heights, Michigan, where there's a county council election that's being, people are pushing and shoving about that issue. Keep in mind, though, that a lobbyist, if you are an industry, you have a lobbyist. Part of the lobbyists in this issue are called Welcoming America. They're active in Sterling Heights and Troy and out in your area. Well, Welcoming America is a lobby group that goes out and promotes what a wonderful situation it is to take refugees. They exaggerate the benefits, and they spend no time at all talking about the cost. One thing they never say is that this is a diversion of let's say Michigan tax money that was intended to go to the poor in Michigan, to veterans in Michigan, to people that need Medicaid in Michigan, etc. So the state funding that is being diverted to the 4,000, and probably next year 5, 6, or 7,000 refugees coming into America being planted by outside organizations and forces, those welfare money was targeted for Michigan people, and that money is being diverted to other people who may or may not need that service, but are being brought here because of an agenda. And the agenda is clear. It is to change America by changing the people. And by the way, Michigan is number one on the change list. If you do percentage, you divide two numbers, you'll find that Michigan is number one in the country per capita in this process of bringing bodies into Michigan to change Michigan by basically changing its people. So Michigan needs to wake up and decide. By the way, there's a new notion coming out. There'll be a petition out, and I'll send you the link shortly, just simply to say, let the county councils decide if state money will be spent to support ongoing refugees in my county.
Well,
no matter what the federal group does.
You bring up a good point here in terms of its money, and I would say perhaps a cynic, and there is a cynical portion of my personality. A cynic might say that certain groups of people are utilizing the poor, the destitute, to get rich. A lot of folks are making not just political power, not just changing a culture, which is apparently, and I would agree with you, perhaps part of their goal, but a lot of the people who are involved in this are engaged in full-time employment. Many of them, I would imagine, are making an awful lot of money. On the backs of the poor, we are spending money that we don't have, certainly, and enriching an awful lot of folks.
Well, these comments and questions are so helpful because they really go to the heart of it, and I appreciate it. I got Jim Simpson's book. Jim was on last week. I just opened it this morning. I came to a table. $2.1 billion, that's $1 billion, has gone to the Catholic Charities Organization over a period of 6 years. That's money that helps to pay for the CEO salary of that organization, the part of the Catholic Charities nationally that moves bodies. That person receives between $300,000 and $400,000 per year as a salary. So we're absolutely positively furthering an industry, and bodies are being moved. By the way, the payment to these agencies is per body. If you go to the Lutheran Services website in Michigan and you look at the front page, there's a message to refugees. If you're a refugee and we placed you, click here and we'll go get your families. So there's a definite industry, and people are making significant amounts of money. The problem is they must be not checking their conscience in the process of doing this. And I'll just concentrate on one group. I happen to be Catholic. The Catholic Church in the United States is moving large quantities of Muslim people into America, and they're making lots of money for it. They are prohibited by law from ever speaking about their faith to a single refugee. That's not the point. We're not talking about, so to the extent that there may be some humanitarian activity, we're not children. We need to be adults and see that people are making money and that we are changing the complexion of Michigan in great numbers. If you look at the state of Michigan, we are very, very near the top of the list in the growth of mosques and other organizations. So we're building an industry. In addition to that, we've said this before on other programs, you can die when you call Michigan government push 3 and you have a conversation on welfare benefits completely in Arabic. You can download a form completely in Arabic. So we have an industry, and we have Michigan people complicit.
Dick, listen, we're almost out of time here. We're down to about 60 seconds for us, but one of the things I want to have everyone think about is specifically you, and we'll have you back on at some point, and perhaps we can get you and Jim Simpson on together. But listen, one of the things that I think is important is what the government's agenda here is. If you look at the math of birth rates in America, and then you factor in the abortion rates in America, we're not producing a large enough generation to sustain the government that we've created. And anyone with a calculator, just a regular $1.50, get it from the local dollar store calculator, can see why our government is embracing this. It's math. Right or wrong, doesn't matter, but the days of the Waltons where the whole bunch of kids are over with, people want 1.5 kids and they want to have their Corvette and all the rest of the stuff. We can't have it both ways. We've got this monolith of a government. It takes an enormous amount of people to manage, maintain, and frankly fund it. And they're filling in the gaps that we're leaving by not procreating enough. And I'm not advocating one way or another. I'm just saying there's a math equation here that's really what's driving this, whether we like it or not. Now, whether they're picking a Muslim faith over a Christian faith, that's certainly a topic for the next conversation. But the biggest issue is why America's having less kids, and then we're killing a large fraction of those possible children. And if you do the math, we're not sustaining ourselves. It's the same thing that's happening in France. It's the same thing that's happening in Great Britain. Frankly, it's a Western civilization cultural crisis that we are not sustaining our own numbers. So with that, I'm sad to say I've got to have the last word because we're out of time, but we will get you back on because I think it was a really, really illuminating conversation for folks. Dick, how can a person get a hold of you before we run out?
Okay, I'm going to give you an email address. It's
Please.
The word administrator at SEMISH912teaparty.org.
No kidding. Dick, thank you very much. Have a great day, folks. Folks, we'll be right back with the Enigma Report.
You're listening to News Talk 1090, WKBZ.
And now back to the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com. And it's time for the Enigma Report.
It's a good thing that you enunciate.
It is the Enigma Report.
It would be frightening if people thought it was the Enema Report.
Oh, jeepers. Where did we get him from, Brian?
Enunciation matters. Well, we're talking about education.
I don't know what I'm reading. What are you reading there, Matt?
This morning in Virginia, a gunman fatally shoots a reporter and videographer in the middle of a live TV interview.
Yep.
Wow.
Two folks shot. Looks on live TV in North Carolina,
Virginia.
Incredible. Yeah. I had not saw that.
Good way to go out, I guess. That's the new America, for all I know.
What an incredible culture.
You know what? What do you think? What do you bet that was a gun-free zone? What do you think?
Couldn't imagine. Listen, the Enigma Report, one of the things I wanted to kick around on my short list is a hidden tax that nobody seems to be aware of. That is the when government overprints money, what does it do?
What do you mean overprints money?
So everyone's always joking about how when the government's got some big, gigantic project, well, don't worry about it. They'll either borrow it from China or they'll print it. Well, they do print it. But when they inject in huge infusions of cash into the cycle using the central bank, what does that do to the economy?
Makes your dollar worth less.
It makes your dollar worth less. And listen, the folks, the difference of what your money was worth versus what it's worth after they've reduced its value is a tax. Make no mistake, they've used that value of your labor to pay for something without your consent. It's just a fact. So when next time you're telling the joke about, oh, don't worry about it, the government will just print some more, understand that they will, that's a fact, and it will decrease the value of the dollars that are in your pocket, and the difference is truly a tax. And to me, the fact that folks don't pause and say, let's have enough of that. Let's make sure that we elect folks that will not allow that to happen. The fact that we're not up in arms is an enigma to me.
Well, when I was listening to something on the bailout, the $865 billion bailout, there was only that amount of actual U.S. dollars in the worldwide economy, and then we infused $865 billion. That instantly splits your dollar in half.
Yeah, well, but the president says there's no inflation. Well, anybody that goes and buys some eggs or some milk,
or pays taxes, we know our taxes have gone up. We know our utilities have gone up. We know our insurance costs have gone up.
To me, it's an enigma because they have taken and adjusted the economy and the value of our work. They've taken our labor and reduced its value. We get hung up on a lot of other words like dollar bills and inflation and deflation, all those things. But the bottom line really is, what is our labor worth? And they've reduced the value of our labor. And that's fundamental. That's as basic as you can get, is what is your labor worth? Doesn't get too much economically. More fundamentally important than the value of your labor. Am I wrong? Jim, you've got a background in finance. What is your take on this?
Well, I think the problem that folks have with understanding this, aside from just the vast complexity, because printing money is entirely different than borrowing additional money and the Federal Reserve spending money on U.S. Treasuries. It's a very complex issue. But the problem I think that Americans have is that we have been told for decades, going back to the Ronald Reagan days, that if we spend too much money, we'll get in trouble. And yet, since then, both political parties have been spending like crazy. At the state level, we see it spending like crazy, and at the local, county, and other levels, we see spending like crazy. And yet, things don't seem to be that bad. Matter of fact, when Republicans are in the minority, they're constantly harping at the Democrats' spending. Spending's a very big issue when the Republicans are in a minority. But when the Republicans become the majority, they seem to get quite quiet. And then the Democrats, we may remember famously, President Obama was saying the level of the national debt, which at that time I believe was $7 trillion, is outrageous, and he was going to fix it. It currently is at $18 trillion. And not only is President Obama a little quiet about it, but his entire political party is a little quiet about it. So I think the problem that we have is we've been told to fear this boogeyman for a long time. Now it's bigger than anyone in their wildest imaginations could have ever expected, and things seem to be going along pretty good.
When's the last time one of those people,
which people,
the Harry Reid's or even the Bushes, went and bought a loaf of bread at the grocery store?
I don't know.
I mean, when I was a kid, you could pick it up for like 50 cents. Now, I know when you guys were kids, it was probably like a penny, but
we made our own out of wheat.
Yeah.
Ground it with stones.
There we go.
Yeah. But now you go and you're like, oh man, 2 for $3 is a good deal.
But listen, some of these things are locked up in populist politics. And an example of that is that it's very, very easy. And I've used this example before, so I just had a little bit of deja vu. But listen, it's really, really populist politics to rag on a local car dealership for the amount of gross profit that they make on a given vehicle. Last I saw the numbers, the average gross profit, that's profit before everything was taken out of it, meaning cost of building, cost of paper, cost of employee, cost of et cetera. The average gross profit was about $1,800 on a used vehicle and about $1,300 on a new vehicle. And everyone thinks, "Holy jeepers, I got ripped off." But they don't say a word about the fact that the average dealership property tax is about $150,000 a year. Property tax. Property tax. You pay $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 on your home. The average dealership is above $150,000 a year. And everyone wants, not everyone, a lot of people love to see corporations and companies in general pay for tax. Make them pay it. And to me, it's an enigma. That's just so obvious that those taxes are not paid by them. They're paid by us.
It's a pass-through.
So I'm one of those guys. I'm okay with a fair tax. I tend to lean towards fair tax, only if we could get rid of all other taxes. 100% all taxes are gone. Make the number whatever it's got to be. I'm a big boy. Make the number whatever it is. But do it in such a fashion that every single person with an average IQ or above can see what they're really paying in tax.
One thing that you would have to face if, in fact, we went that route, which in theory, like socialism and communism in theory appear to be quite good, is that in every instance, and I don't mean 99.67%, I mean in 100% of every instance where countries have gone to a flat tax, be it a GST like they have in Canada or any others, as soon as that flat tax is set, as soon as the other taxes are taken away,
then they ram back all the other taxes again.
New taxes start coming in, right. And that little bitty, I believe the GST, which is the general sales tax in Canada, I believe it started out at 7%. I think it is 13-15% today.
Something in the sky.
And it didn't go up in big jumps. It went up in little eighth and a quarter
Jim,
at a time.
Therein lies the problem. It feels like you don't trust the government.
Well, I'm the student of history. I know what they do if we give them the opportunity, and we have given them that opportunity. I
would be okay with a fixed flat tax or with a fair tax, but only buttressed with a constitutional amendment that demanded that be the only tax. And I think that forget Democrat and Republican, the people would demand government be responsible if they knew what they were actually paying. But folks don't have a clue. It reminds me of when we had Jana Konechi on, and she said they didn't have very high taxes at all in the Soviet Union, but they didn't make very much because the government took it off the top before they even saw it. And that's kind of where we're at now. It's all just different labels. But listen, we're down to what, I think 2 minutes? And is it 2 or 3? 3, 2, peace. Peace, Brian. I tell you, he's like the bumpers at the bowling alley. Listen, the last thing on my Enigma report, which is a real enigma, is that Jim Riley was right a few weeks ago.
That's the enigma. That's definitely the enigma.
Wait a minute. Let's make sure the iHeartRadio is working at this point.
Listen, one of the things you and I got into a little sparring matches, because I'm really one of those people. I buy local first. I buy Michigan second. I buy made in the United States third. I purposefully go out of my way to find things that were not built somewhere else. I don't have an Asian phobia. I don't have an English there's not other countries. There's not other races. I really want to support American workers, starting with local community up. And you and I were talking about cars. And I talked about people they're always whining about outsourcing, and then they go hop in their Kia and drive away. And it just blows my mind that there's no rationale. On the window sticker of every car that's allowed to be sold in America new is a product content. Shows you how much of the vehicle was made in the United States. And I'm looking at the top 7 according to Cars.com. As a Toyota Camry is #1 built in America. Next one is a Chevy Traverse. Next one is a Toyota. Next one is a Honda. You go, wait a minute. 3 of the top 7 carry a Japanese label. So in this case, Jim, I concede you were right that day. That is an enigma.
It won't be the first.
It's the only one. And you've been on this show for 3 years. It's the only one.
No more Oreos, Mike. No more Oreos.
It's just a terrible situation, folks. I'm telling you, I have to opine. Okay, folks, listen. RenegadeRiver.com is who supports this show. And you can also find the show on Facebook, and you can find us on Twitter at Talk Mike Hewitt. We'll see you next Wednesday at 9 a.m. Have a great week, folks.